All right, let's give it our best shot one more time. There it is. Carlo has a question. Who else? 2, 3 questions. 4, 5. Brilliant. Maybe we start from the back. The gentleman that is standing.
Yes, you showed the importance of the interaction between the C3S teams to getting things right. From the user feedback, what do you have in terms of quality control or quality evaluation request from the users? What type of quality control do they request?
So this is Michaela and Andre, I guess?
Yes.
Yes? Do we have a mic? We do.
Yeah, thank you, Harry Lars, for the question. I mean, yeah, we're getting a lot of requests, obviously, via the various channels I mentioned. Help desk is dealing on a daily basis with users asking about the quality for the data, etc. Michaela could also talk to you about the user support journey, where the users will be pointed to the different documentation, etc., to the quality assurance reports. In particular, looking forward to the next phase, we're trying to better understand the needs of users in terms of quality assurance information. So we are putting significant efforts there to understand how we should structure the catalog, what kind of information we should put there, a part of the quality assurance technical scientific information, also kind of the higher level information, what users want to know about the data, which context they can use the data, all of these questions, there is, as you know, significant efforts being undertaken in the future as well. And if anyone wants to further elaborate.
Brilliant. Anyone else on the panel who wishes to respond to this? No, seeing none. I think there was a question right there. Yes?
Yeah, actually a very similar question, but we know with Andrew we work together on the EQC, and it's a little bit confused for me, but EQC now, because we know that in the last phase we do EQC for everything, but this morning the presentation we have done is only for data set. Are you planning also to do the EQC for other elements of the CDS in the next step? That's one issue. The other one is very similar to Harold mentioned. We saw different requirements, but I think I think the direct maybe interaction is important as well, because we in this case we get the feedback first, but this morning we already identified one of the users who I think was useful for us to talk to. The other one is I think we need to work together to have this user engagement, because we are really working on the EQC, but we need to talk with them. That's why definitely this morning I already mentioned we have to, from the EQC team, we need to talk with the users. I think by sending the documents or just collect information, I see the user requirement, but I think it's really general for us. We need to really very detailed, I think, the not requirement, but mainly the comments to improve our EQC. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, very quick. I don't want to monopolize the panel, and I'm sure there are other people who want to talk about EQC. Of course, we are trying to also cover in the next phase, tools and applications beyond the data sets. So just to answer your first question, but the rest maybe other panelists want to elaborate on.
Yeah, just to answer the second question, I think that's more user engagement. So where we actually go to the users, we speak to them, through users, through various different events. We really speak to them. We find out what their needs are. So that's a kind of separate element to the EQC.
Very nice. I think there were 3 questions here at the front. Let's start with Carlo and then take it to the other side.
Thank you. Actually, this is a question a bit to the entire panel up to a certain extent. So something that struck me when reading the very interesting report on the user landscape from USPA was their prediction for the financial sector to be a very important sector for climate services in the future, one of those expecting the largest growth. And in a sense, in your intervention, you were talking about EIB and how much the knowledge within the community has changed over the 10 years, something that certainly resonated with me. So I guess my question to the panel is, and linking also to Chris, how can we care best for this growing need from the financial sector in terms of training requirement, in terms of knowledge base, in terms of user support? What can we do to address that emerging market better?
Perhaps we start with Edward. If you wish, or someone else. There's no force.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I mean, I think on one level, there are pioneers out there who are investing time and money into trying to get at least excellent data. I think an interesting point remains how you project into the future, which scenario, how do you think from a finance perspective, you know, which is the appropriate amount of risk aversion do you want? I mean, you can be more risk averse, it costs more money. So I think, the reassurance I think is that I think there's a lot of players out there who are now taking this very seriously. I think to some extent, although the market will move quite quickly because of the regulatory environment and because there's simply so much at stake. So I think it's really around. We certainly are trying to prioritize partnerships with key players. I think there's a very different dynamic perhaps within Europe and outside of the EU, and one of the areas we're really trying to work with in partnership in least developed countries and SIDS. So yeah, it's a journey. Not quite sure what the optimal route through it is, but I think the good news is that it's not entirely driven by the public sector. There is a strong incentive for the private sector to invest.
May I complement? Indeed, we are going to have the user consultation platform, the insurance and finance session, where all the different stakeholders from insurance companies, finance sector will be invited. You will be attending also this session. And the objective of this session is to gather user needs and requirements, and then we will publish the report. So you will be part of this exercise directly and very soon on the 3rd of October. So I think this is a good news. And yeah, that was my answer.
Yeah, I just want to mention that we are also in discussion with the EIB on how we can, how we can support with training, I think, to EIB staff and also to some of your clients. So this is, something that we're in the process of doing as well.
Brilliant.
Yes, I have a question which maybe falls in between the learning part and the EQS. There's one sort of information which we use a lot. It's peer-reviewed journal papers when it comes to understanding something about a given data set, can be ERA5, can be seasonal prediction, something like that. Are you actively looking at the literature as it comes in order to maybe pick the best articles or at least have an idea of what is it that people use the data for? Are you considering, because the thing is that if you ask users like me or people who are not into academia, who are not publishing peer-reviewed analysis, you may receive whatever kind of feedback, while in peer-reviewed journals, you are at least a bit more certain that the statements that are produced in these studies are closer to being accurate. So I wonder how much you want to engage into listing those papers, discussing them, bringing them to your users.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we should do more of that because at the moment, we have the EQC process and we have the requirements that come from different sources. We also look at, who uses our data. We look at the statistics. And we have different channels where we collect this kind of feedback. And we also have our user engagement activities where we, approach the users. But I think we need to do more of this kind of literature review, to see, in the publications, and learn from that and extract user requirements also from that. And maybe I'll hand over to Andre as well. If you want to.
I can very quickly react to this as well. I mean, as you say, a lot of data sets have use cases, there's scientific literature, etc. There are technical papers, whatever, so a lot of knowledge, how data is being used, how data should be used or should not be used, etc. And we are trying via the EQC function, again, to expose this information in the next phase, to make it more transparent and to sort of kind of extract the key messages from all this scientific literature. So that will help users definitely to make choices which data set to use for the specific purpose.
Yes, hi. Couple of light questions. One for Edward, please. One for Chris. For Edward, a geography question. I see that Fiji is on your map, and I wasn't aware of European Investment Bank investing outside. So if you can explain a little, I see you're partnered with the ADB and Green Climate Fund, but what is the domain and your purpose? Because unlike the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which has a more limited domain, you seem to be worldwide, no?
Yeah, let's take this question first.
Yeah, I mean, just take that quickly. Yeah, I mean, so we operate globally. So around 10% of our lending per year is outside of the EU. Strong focus on I mean, neighborhood. And let's say development, Africa, ACP focus. A large chunk, I mean, of the assets that we're supporting are climate action. So a very strong share of our activities is climate action, but we also, health and there's other, let's say, activities that are orthogonal to climate. They need to be Paris aligned, but they're not actively supporting climate goals. But health and basic infrastructure is also another strong mandate. So, yeah, so we have a lot of cover a large. I mean, essentially the entire world. But we partner also a lot with other players, including Asian Development Bank, World Bank, etc.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry, the one for Chris, just a quick one. I don't know if there is an answer. Is there any kind of framework you use for training that can be used by others in the audience and when we prepare training in general?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. What I would say is that if you go onto the C3S training landing page, it depends on what kind of training you want to do, but with the spirit of the train the trainers approach, we do have material that you can use as a template. So for example, our Jupyter notebooks are fully free and open. You can take them, you can adapt them, you can change whatever you want, and you can reuse them in your training events. And in fact, the idea is to have our material as kind of guidelines that you can then take and you can modify and use yourself. And also our materials. I mean, any material you have, please feel free to see them. If we can also adapt them to suit your needs, then get in touch and we can see what we can do. So yeah, very much we want to bring them out there as much as possible. We want them to be used. And any comments, we'd love to hear from you.
No need to apologize. Go for it.
Very quickly to clarify your question, we do a lot of literature check. So each of the data sets, the evaluators will go through all the literature as many as possible because we cannot do all the evaluation by ourselves. So the literature, scientific papers is a really one big source of our evaluation. Yeah, just want to thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I think I saw one more hand go. I'm not sure where. Is that one? And then let's start with Sam, perhaps.
Thanks. Another question from online. How should user requirements be communicated more broadly to C3S stakeholders and external communities?
Yeah, I can take this one as well. The first thing to say, there's the realization, actually, that there's a lot of appetite in the community, obviously, to learn from these requirements. We are sitting on a pool, on a treasure of requirements, more than 4,000 requirements. And we are well aware of the fact that we can't only implement things internally. We can't actually. We need our communities to help us implement these things. So there are research agendas that we can drive. There are space agencies that we can inform, etc. So the plan is indeed for the next phase to much broader communicate at least the intelligence we are getting out of the requirements. The database itself is a different story because of the personal data protection, etc. But we can share, all the insights from these requirements, and we are planning to do so. Okay.
Okay, let's start there.
No, okay, it's a very short question because you have identified the banking sector as one stakeholder when it comes to requirements for infrastructure project. From the engineering side, beside the engineers working on the thing, you also have certifying bodies, people that are at a national or regional level giving basically out standards for how to build stuff. And I wonder whether these people would maybe be helpful to you when it comes to understanding how they see the situation. Because a lot of the things I do, for example, are governed by these standards that I do not control. They come to us and they are somewhat imposed to us. But of course, there's a great deal of thinking that comes into these standards. And I wonder, for example, people like DNV, maybe you know the company DNV or Bureau Veritas or Germanische Lloyd, these organizations, they typically come with the extra requirements that you may be looking for.
Shall we take a comment from Carlo, perhaps? Is it directly related, or do you want to go to the forum first?
I think I can answer that question.
Part of it? Yeah, go for it.
I don't know if Andre, if you want to... You sure? Yes, we worked with them. So we worked with them, and actually I was looking back to see whether Chiara is there, and Chiara can also add. But with DG Klima, there has been a strong collaboration on standard, for instance, for climate adaptation that is ongoing, and we had an impact on some standard already. Yeah. So that is ongoing. It's fully understood as being a very important requirement, and one of the way in which, for me, we can mainstream climate services through society. So fully understood. Chiara, do you want to add something?
Yes, we established a connection and a dialogue with the Eurocodes, for example, and yes, and we were able to collect some specific requirements. So we have plans. I mentioned this, but it was maybe too fast in my slide. Thanks. I also had a question, but maybe after.
Well, go ahead. You have the microphone.
The question is for...
And then you give it to the gentleman in the back.
The question is for Edward. And you were showing your risk assessments. And I was wondering how important is that there is a transparent workflow behind your risk assessment. And you were mentioning those tools, that could be complex tools to make those kind of assessments. How important is that this complexity is understood? So that, for example, when you take a decision, I don't know, an investment decision, behind that you can have you can go back to the history that put you to take this decision, so anything is traced back. So the question is how important that the complex tool behind your assessments are understood, and how important that there is a transparency behind these workflows that lead you to the risk assessment. I don't know if I was clear. No.
That was clear, Chiara. I just try to think how I can answer it briefly and simply. Look, I think a couple of things. Transparency, yes, we have to, essentially we publish our assessments. We have an environmental and social data sheet, so we go on the public record. I think the point I was trying to make is, because I think it's relevant also for often in dealing with people, with scientists or people dealing with the actual data, is that at the end we have to boil that down to something incredibly simple for decision-making purposes. So the risk assessment at the end of the day, the residual risk boils down to essentially high, medium, or low. Right? This is that's something to, I think, to be conscious of in designing these sort of tools. You need to cut through the complexity. So, yeah.
Yeah, my question was also about the methodologies behind the risk assessments in the banking and finance sector. How do you see the maturity of the assessments of those methodologies in this sector? I know, for example, I'm saying that because there was a recent criticism from the scientific community of the assessment methodology that was recommended by the NGFS, the Network for Greening the Finance, which assembles most of the central banks that produce the methodology, that got criticized afterwards for underestimating the extreme events, for example. What's your view? Can you comment that? And what's your view on the maturity in the finance sector on those assessments methodology, and also related to the transparency issue on those same methodologies that Carol was asking before?
I can't comment on the specifics of the NGFS debate, because actually I haven't followed that. But I mean, I think that the slide I showed from the European Central Bank saying that 50% of banks currently have something that's either inadequate or non-transparent is a strong signal. I would also perhaps just add the point, I think banks have, I mean, the methodology, the conceptual thing of thinking through transition risk on your balance sheet, that's quite relatively straightforward. It's relatively straight. It's not completely straightforward, but it's relatively straightforward, and I think that's well understood. By contrast, I think on the the adaptation, the climate resilience dimension is far less well understood. So we're at the beginning of a journey, and hopefully with ECM WF we can put something, we can improve from an EIB perspective.
Is there any other very burning question at this point? I guess there isn't. Let's give an applause to Alexandra, who volunteered to carry on the microphone from 9 until now.